Imagine a military equation where Pakistan brings nuclear deterrence and a large combat force. Turkey brings one of NATO's most capable militaries and a rapidly expanding defense industry. And Saudi Arabia brings money, geography, and enormous strategic importance. Now put all the three under one defense agreement where an attack on one is considered as an attack on all. This is no longer just another defense deal. The real question is, are we witnessing the emergence of a new strategic power center stretching from South Asia to the Gulf and to the Mediterranean? And more importantly, what does this mean for India? Welcome to the Strategic Hangar. On 7th August 2026, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and Turkey signed what is called the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement. The most important clause is straightforward. An armed attack on any of the countries will be regarded as an attack against all the three. Now, some people have already started calling this as an Islamic NATO. I would be careful with that description. This is not NATO. There is no NATO-style institutional structure here, and Turkey's NATO membership does not mean that NATO itself is committed to defending Saudi Arabia or Pakistan. So instead of asking, is this an Islamic NATO, I think the more important question is, what strategic capability does this combination create? Because that's where the things get interesting. Think of this partnership as three pieces of a strategic puzzle. Pakistan brings military mass and strategic deterrence. It has a large standing military, significant air and missile capabilities, combat experience, and most importantly, nuclear weapons. Turkey brings technology and defense industrial capability. Its military is one of NATO's largest, while its indigenous defense industry has developed rapidly. From drones and missiles to naval systems, electronic warfare, and other advanced technologies. And then there is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia brings something that the other two don't possess at the same scale: financial power, strategic geography, and energy influence. So you have Pakistan, which has got military capability, you have Turkey, which has got technology and defense industry, and you've got Saudi Arabia, which has got capital, geography, strategic access. Individually, each of these countries has its limitation. But if their defense cooperation moves from paper agreements to joint exercises, intelligence sharing, integrated planning, and defense production, the equation could become considerably more powerful. And that possibility is far more important than the ceremony in Mecca. Another important thing, the timing is critical. The Middle East is already experiencing a period of extraordinary strategic instability. Saudi Arabia has spent years trying to diversify its security relationship rather than depending entirely on one external power. And Pakistan has maintained a long-standing military relationship with Saudi Arabia. Turkey, meanwhile, has been extending its strategic influence well beyond its immediate neighborhood. So this agreement can be viewed as a part of a broader trend. Regional powers trying to build their own security architecture, and there is another dimension. For Saudi Arabia, the Pact potentially raises the cost of military action against it. An adversary now has to consider, if I attack Saudi Arabia, am I potentially creating a confrontation with Pakistan and Turkey as well? That is a classical deterrence. And deterrence by itself can actually contribute to stability. There is, however, another side to this. Defense alliances can prevent war, but they can also expand wars. Imagine a crisis involving Saudi Arabia and another regional power. If Saudi Arabia comes under attack, Pakistan and Turkey now have a political obligation to consider their response. Similarly, imagine a future crisis involving Pakistan, and now Saudi Arabia and Turkey have to calculate whether and how they can respond. This creates what strategists call a risk of entrapment. A conflict that previously might have remained bilateral could potentially acquire a much wider set of participants. And this is where the real test of agreement will come. Is this alliance primarily about deterrence, or will it eventually become an instrument for power projection? And that is precisely why the agreement deserves attention. And there is another country that will be watching this very closely: Iran. Look at the geography. Turkey to the northwest, Pakistan to the east, and Saudi Arabia across the Gulf. Iran suddenly has to account for a much more interconnected security environment. But at this stage, I would not describe this as an anti-Iran alliance, at least not yet. Saudi Arabia has previously pursued dialogue with Tehran, and Turkey has its own complex relationship with Iran. So the three countries don't necessarily share the same strategic objectives, but they now share something very important: a common security framework. And that alone changes calculations in Tehran. And for India, this development deserves careful attention, but not panic. The biggest mistake would be to assume that Saudi Arabia has suddenly become part of an anti-India bloc. That is simply too simplistic. India's relationship with Saudi Arabia is far broader than defense. trade, synergy, and strategic cooperation give Riyadh strong reason to maintain its relationship with New Delhi. But Turkey is different. Ankara already has a close strategic and defense partnership with Pakistan. And now Turkish military technology, Pakistani military capability, and Saudi's financial resources could potentially operate within a common strategic framework. That is something India will have to carefully monitor. So what exactly should India be watching? Not the speeches, the military integration. Watch out for 5 things. First, joint air exercises. Secondly, intelligence sharing and information fusion. Third, joint defense production and technology transfer. Fourth is the maritime cooperation in the Arabian Sea and the wider Indian Ocean. And finally, the 5th part, how this pact is interpreted during the next Indo-Pak crisis. Because that will be the real test. If the agreement remains primarily focused on regional security, it could actually strengthen deterrence. But if it evolves into a mechanism for coordinated military action, particularly involving Pakistan, then India's strategic calculation become considerably more complicated. So my assessment right now is simple. This is not yet a new NATO, but it could become something strategically important. Because when you combine Pakistan's military power, Turkey's technology, and Saudi Arabia's financial and geographic influence, you don't necessarily create a new military power, but you do create a new strategic equation. And for India, the answer should not be alarm. It should be awareness, preparedness, and strategic engagement. Because in geopolitics, the most dangerous development is not always the enemy becoming stronger. Sometimes it is 3 separate powers discovering that they can become stronger together. This is the Strategic Hangar, and see you later.